Good morning, cricket fans, and welcome to the Catch It podcast.
Oh, what a catch!
I'm Andrew Lush, and I started this podcast to have some interesting and insightful conversations about analytics and the stats behind the action, and to develop myself as a presenter.
Good! Oh, brilliant!
I hope you enjoy our discussions and debates.
That is an absolutely outstanding catch.
Okay, Jarrod Kimber, welcome to the Catch It podcast and this series of Analyst Chat. How are you doing today?
I'm tired.
It was an early start to you with the test match over in India, so it's been a long day so far. So thank you for making the time.
That's fine. Yeah, no, all good.
So we're going to jump straight in. When you were growing up in Melbourne, why was it cricket? Who inspired you to play the game, first of all?
I didn't realise that people didn't play cricket. I came from a family where everyone played, and my mum was the scorer and the vice president of the club, and my auntie was the secretary. And actually, I might have got the positions wrong, but all my aunties and my uncles all had positions within the cricket club. Everyone played all day Saturday. It just didn't occur to me that it wasn't a sport that people played. Professionally, I suppose, like the first time I went to a big cricket game was a Shield game. And I remember a couple of things. I remember Mike Whitney falling over when he came into bowl, which amused me. But I remember Simon O'Donnell hooking a bunch of fours and sixes and thinking that there was something pretty cool about it. But yeah, I don't have a great origin story compared to other people because I was already there. Like it never occurred to me that cricket wasn't a thing.
It was just kind of a natural pathway. It was always going to be a part of your life, and always going to be.
And it's weird looking back because a lot of the kids I grew up with who were in that same sort of cricket club culture that I was in didn't feel the same way. Thinking about it, like going back, some of them played junior cricket and they disappeared. Some of them didn't even really play all that much junior cricket, but I never even questioned it. So obviously I liked it from a very early age, and it was always part of it. But yeah, I was at my first cricket game when I was a week and a half old. So, asking me when I first fell in love with cricket, that was just what our family did. It didn't occur to me for it not to be for a very long time.
And when did you start thinking of it in a more analytical way? When did you want to kind of prod the bear in such a way in terms of test some of the theories that you were thinking of? And it said in Hitting Against the Spin, the two the journalists that wrote that, they realized that they liked counting stuff. When did that kind of spark happen for you?
I went to a lot of Shield cricket, and just no one goes to Shield cricket. Like, really small crowd. Like in the MCG, if you get 100 people for a Shield day, sometimes that's what happens. It's a weird thing to be one of 100 people in a stadium, and I've probably been one of far fewer in some of those games as well. And I was always sort of drawn to captaincy as a cricketer, and I was always more interested in sort of not cricket theory, but like there must be other ways to do it. Australian cricket was quite didactic. You win the toss, you bat first, and I was like, I want to win the toss and bowl. And my old man would be like, why? And I said, well, if every other team wins the toss and bats first, and we win the toss and always bowl first, doesn't that mean that almost every single game we will bowl first, and we'll get really good at bowling first? And it was like this empty sound of everyone like, no, you win the toss and bat first. And I'm like, okay. So obviously, so I did. I mean, in things like school cricket, we would do that. I'd drive the coach absolutely crazy, and he'd be like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, and I would do things like have fielders 3/4 of the way to the fence and stuff like that. And, I remember one coach just screaming from off the field, going, put him on the fence. And I went, no, this kid can't hit it to the fence, right? Like, he will only, if he's going to try this shot, that is where it's going to go. He's just not big enough to hit the ball that far. And of course, 4 balls later, he hits it there. I look like a genius. It could have looked the opposite if he actually got it off the middle. It might have gone over the top. I don't know. But I always had those kinds of theories and, different ways of looking at it. But being at all those Shield games and watching professional cricket, I kind of felt that there was something missing. There was a coach in those days. I don't even know if you had batting and bowling coaches in Shield cricket, but it felt like no one was really putting it all together and no one was watching everything. And cricket was really amateur in Australia. And I remember one day having a chat with Trevor Hones, who was the chairman of selected. And I was like, okay, let's say 15 or 16. But there's no one in the ground, dude, right? Like when I say I had a chat with the chairman of selectors, it was literally I was sitting there. There was a guy 7 rows in front of me, and there was a guy 2 rows behind me. And the guy 2 rows behind me asked a question, and I answered it. And I turned around and realized it was the national selector, right?
That's incredible.
Yeah. And it was a simple question. I can't. I think the player's name was Corey Richards. And he asked me what I thought about Corey Richards. And I sort of half turned around and started telling him what I thought about Corey Richards because I think he made 100 that day. Then as I turned around, I realized who I was talking to. And then I, of course, went into full Victorian mode and started telling him how Matthew Elliott's 100 the day before was the best thing I'd ever seen. It's still one of the best 100s I've ever seen, actually. But and I remember at the time thinking, kind of the fantasy side of your brain then goes, like, maybe he thinks I'm really smart. Whereas I remember what I was telling him was I thought that Corey Richards was always driving too far from his body and that he was a chance of nicking off. And Trevor Holmes might have thought that was nonsense, right? And so he might have thought, stupid kid, shut up. He's just made 100 at MCG against good bowlers. Like, give him some credit. But the point being is that I remember from that day thinking it would be really cool if I could get into a position where I could use my ability to watch the game, which I think I watched the game differently than other people. I knew that bit I knew in that sort of stuff, but analyst wasn't a job then, right? We're talking about 96, 97. Australia, I don't think Cricket Australia have an analyst until about 2011, right? So it wasn't a job. It wasn't a pathway. I didn't know how to get into it anyway. I didn't really understand all that sort of stuff. And I wouldn't have been able to, there was no numbers or anything for me to have looked up. There was no way to get to video or anything like that. All I knew is I watched a lot of cricket and I could see patterns in cricket that when I talked to even what I thought were great cricketers, I'm talking club cricketers here, they didn't see the same patterns that I saw. And I would say something casually and they would stop and look at me and I'd be like, but it's obvious, everyone knows this. And they'd be like, no, what are you talking about?
So even back then, were you challenging perceived knowledge, or like the example that you used with the boundary fielders?
Yeah.
If you're looking at a batter and they can't at a certain age hit that far, why would you have the perceived knowledge of the boundary protecting right on the rope? Because they're never going to clear him.
Yeah. So there was lots of little things like that and little theories that I had. And I remember we had a really good player who was so I went from club cricket to sub-district in Victoria, in Melbourne, which is a weird, like, it's kind of like a Lancashire Leagues type or a Staffordshire Leagues type thing where you're just like, why is everyone making money? This is club cricket.
How are they getting in all these internationals and stuff?
I honestly think it's one of the reasons why Melbourne cricket's not as good as Sydney cricket, because a lot of people go and play for the money in sub-district rather than playing district cricket, and it dilutes the talent pool at the top level. Anyway, that's a really boring thing, but and I say that as a guy who loved sub-district cricket and played it. But our captain coach, I think it was his first year playing for us, and he came over for the money as well. I won't say his name now because he'll be really upset. But he had just broken a record I think it was in Lancashire Leagues, of Dean Jones, like scored a ridiculous amount of runs, most runs anyone had ever scored for that club or in that area, whatever it was. And he played second 11 for Victoria. Very close to playing for South Australia as well. Like, he was a first class. He would have played county cricket in England and probably would have had a 7 to 10 year career. And I worked for him for a little while. He had a gardening company, and I'd be sitting there saying these things to him, and you could see his head going, Jarrod's not even good at cricket. Like, how is, and that was, I think that was the big disconnect, was these guys were like, how does this guy think? And so in their mind, it didn't make sense that I was saying this because I couldn't do these things myself, but I could see all these things that they couldn't see, and they were much better than me. And I think some of it is just the ability I can see things consciously that really good cricketers see subconsciously. So sometimes I'll be talking to a professional cricketer, I'll say something, and they'll be like, no one's ever said that before, but I've always thought that. But I think in their mind, it's also subconscious. Whereas
it's a feeling. It's a feeling rather they haven't mapped it out.
And they might not even have ever said it out loud, but subconsciously, the minute I've had these, me and Gareth Buddy spend so much time together. We have these late night conversations where it's just like, that makes perfect sense. Why hasn't anyone ever told me this before? And I think that's what it was like with these cricketers. But the difference is that these cricketers knew that I wasn't a great cricketer, right? Like, most of them would have said that if I had any skill at all, it was probably as a fielder, right? And maybe as like a potential captain, because I did come up with these sorts of things, but even then, I don't think I was a natural captain in that kind of way. I was more a natural vice captain of the guy that goes up and goes, "We should try this," and the captain's like,
this needs to be said by someone else, but
yes.
it won't be
Can you tell the rest of the group what I'm thinking? So it was, I suppose, in that way, it was always there. Looking back, I remember my dad would look at me really weirdly when he would drive me to cricket, and he was the coach, and I was like writing notes on what I was going to do, like bowling changes, batting orders, fielding positions for different bowlers. And he'd be like, "What? Just captain, you don't need all this." But he was, my dad was a very talented natural cricketer. Even now, he's got no bones in his shoulders, and I'm sure he could still bowl an outswinger, like even with an old ball. Like he's just very natural. Whereas I overthought everything and complicated everything. But obviously, it works in this other thing. And then I stopped playing cricket in around 2003. I was working shift work, and I got dropped to the fours because I'd gone from the seconds to the fours because I wasn't training, and
life was catching up with you, really.
Yeah, and I was working shift work, so I would quite often work till 7 a.m., sleep for an hour and a half, and then go and play a game, and then go back to work that night. And it was really, really hard. And the club was, Australian club cricket is really serious. It's not like English cricket where you just rock up on Saturday, and as long as you're there before the start of the game, it's fine. Like I got dropped from the thirds to so I'd been dropped from the seconds to the thirds for not training. I got dropped from the thirds to the fourths because I'd been working till 9 a.m. I'd gone to have a 10-minute nap, obviously slept in, got to around half an hour late.
Game.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, just half an hour late to the game. Actually, I may not have even missed the game. I may have just missed the warm-ups. And I just got to a point in my life where it wasn't working. And then I'd sort of started blogging and writing and everything for a little while. And I'd written some blogs and had some success, but I didn't really know what to write about. And I had a friend who's a basketball writer, and he played basketball on a scholarship in college in America, and he was sort of coming to a point where he didn't want to come back to Australia and play professional basketball. He really wanted to become a basketball writer, and he has gone on to be a basketball writer and worked for Basketball Reference and NBA and a few different places as a writer. So he's done very, very well. But he wanted to start a basketball blog, and he was sort of saying, "Can you just help me with blogging? I don't really understand." And I was like, "Oh, it's easy. This is what you do. This is how it works, from a technical point of view, but also from a narrative point of view." I said, it has to be different to what mainstream is because there has to be a reason they come to you. And I explained it. And we were at a footy game, Aussie Rules football, and his team was flogging mine. So we just talked about this for like an hour and a half. I think they were like 100 points up. Like there was no point watching this game anymore. And at the end, he just sort of said, "Why are you not running a cricket blog?" Because he knew that I had this passion. And I think by that stage, Cricket Info was a fairly major thing, and I spent a lot of time on Stats Guru and looking up scorecards. And I'd always been the guy that would open the newspapers even in winter and look for the county scorecards, like overseas tests, counties, and all that sort of stuff. And I knew the narratives, even if I didn't know all the stats of all the different players. And he just sort of said it, and I was just like, "Yeah, I don't know. It never occurred to me."
It's one of those light bulb moments that you don't know why you're not doing something.
Yeah. And
it could be something.
I don't think, even if you go back, I had written some stuff about cricket at school. I remember we had to write an instructional essay. I mean, this shows how silly it was that I never put two and two together. But I remember we had to write an instructional essay maybe in year 10. So, and my instructional essay was how to use bodyline, but with only two fielders behind square.
Okay.
So I basically come up with a field that I thought could work for bodyline, but you had to be prepared for going at 8 runs and over and all this. Teacher was,
but you would take wickets in this.
Essentially, it was because we played on AstroTurf, so. If once the ball stopped swinging, if you didn't have a good spinner, like bounces were like 80% of the options, right?
And you have to bowl pretty accurately as a spinner. I played on, so I lived in Southeast Asia for 2 years, and my parents still live out there. And I played in an immigrants league, and oh my gosh, I was an off spinner. And if you didn't bowl in the right areas, these Indian and Pakistani immigrants would just absolutely take me over cow corner.
And the way it sort of bounces up when you're a spinner, it bounces up like a tennis ball a little bit, so they can cross bat you anywhere.
Horrendous.
So so I wrote that, and I wrote a couple of other things. And even when I had my early blog, I think I wrote 1 or 2 pieces on cricket. I think I wrote something during the 2005 Ashes on one of the early blogs, but I can't even find the blog anymore, even if that exists. But so he sort of says, you should start this blog, and this is 2007, so maybe July of 2007. And I was like, that's pretty fair. I should do it. And I really wanted to replicate the conversations that my friends had, because I thought that cricket conversation in Australia was stupid. It was really...
They were one-dimensional.
Just really dumb. It was, Australia's great. Everyone else is crap. But this is the only way to play cricket. And it was like, it never made any sense. I remember one of the things that really pushed me, that I thought I could add something, was Peter Roebuck, and obviously, you know, a controversial figure, but Peter Roebuck, when he was on radio, and I can't remember who the commentator was, but Adam Gilchrist was about a year into his Test career, and the commentator said, you'd have to say he's the best, you know, 2 or 3 batters in the world in Test cricket. And Peter Roebuck was like, what? Brian Lara, Steve Waugh, Ricky Ponting, Sachin Tendulkar, and he just went through them, right? But there was no thought, and Channel 9 was a big part of this, but even ABC would fall into it sometimes, and the newspaper writing was very similar. It was the overseas
They'd say
players,
names. And
the
just
overseas players just didn't matter. I remember, I can't remember what it was, but after I'd started the blog, there was Ian Healy referred to Dale Steyn as the James Pattinson of South Africa. And I was just like, what the fuck are we talking about here, right?
A bold claim.
Yeah. And Pattinson was like 5 tests into his career. Don't get me wrong, he had great figures. But Steyn was already Steyn. It was quite clear that Steyn was on the path for greatness. And Pattinson maybe would one day get to that path.
Yeah.
You know, and it was stuff like that I was just like, and you know, I love Crash Craddock and some of the old writers, but they just didn't write about cricket. They wrote a lot about cricket news. And there was a couple of guys like Darren Berry and a couple of the other cricketers who had like smaller columns who would write like 500 or 600 words, and they'd be like, you get one of them a week where you learn anything about the game. And the way that my friends talked about it, and remember, my friends aren't great cricketers either. I'd be the best cricketer out of that friendship group. But the way that we talked about cricket was just so elevated over what they were doing. And so when I started the blog, I was like, well, I'm just going to do what we do. Like, if we like it, maybe someone else will like it. And, you know, we were the sort of guys, we were in Chicago in 2003, you know, up at 3 a.m. having a discussion on what Adam Gilchrist's average would end up at, right? And, you know, that's the sort of group that we were in. And we were the same with football and basketball, to be fair, as well.
Sound like great sports conversations.
I mean,
especially for a certain demographic of sports fans.
I was going to say, they're either great or the worst things. I'll tell you what, the people in the dorm of at 3 a.m. in Chicago didn't think they were as great as you did. But yeah, so we were, you know, and I wanted to replicate that. And at the same time, I was writing a book, a novel. And so the novel character had this kind of very bloggy kind of voice, because he was kind of writing a blog that people were finding very much like all those sort of weird YouTubers that have become famous, like is it Paul Anderson? I want to say
Jake Paul, Logan Paul.
No, the other guys, the more conspiracy kind of guys.
I'm trying to think of an example.
You know the ones I'm talking about, though. The guys who all ended up on Alex Jones's shows over the years, right? And weirdly enough, I kind of saw that trend happening. So I was writing a novel about one of those guys kind of before those guys existed, because I could tell it was going to happen. But I used the voice of that character to write this blog, more from anything that that was such a strong voice at the time, and it was easier to do that than work out what voice I wanted to write the blog in. And combination
so you took the kind of character a bit contrary to anything cricket style or anything that was classical cricket, and wrote it in that style.
And you've got to remember that I'd always read about cricket, and I'd read a few books, but I wasn't a huge book reader. I was very voracious at reading newspapers, but mostly Murdoch newspapers, right? So, you know, very straight down the line, match reports sort of stuff, as I said. My family didn't get the broadsheet, so I didn't always have access to that. There weren't a lot of cricket magazines, and even when they weren't as many as they were in the UK or anything like that. You know, 1 newspaper town, 2 newspaper towns, that sort of thing. So I didn't really know how you wrote about cricket, and what I did know is how to write movies, right? Because
do you think that was a strength of your early days? You weren't given a classical training or kind of a stereotypical training of how it should be done?
It's the only reason I'm here now, really, because it leads to everything. There was a point at which, and I maybe 2008, 2009-ish, where I was getting, 50,000 people a day on my blog, right? It sounds like a made-up number, kind of, because of how big it was. But a lot of that was the combination of writing about global things. So again, if I knew what I was doing, I would have written about the Australian team, right? I didn't know what I was doing, so I wrote about all teams because I liked all teams, right? I wrote in this character's voice, which was, anarchic, swearing, nonsense. Like a lot of it is like there was everything. Like it was conspiratorial. It was it was anti-gay people, but it was anti-straight people as well. Like it was anti-women, then it was anti-men. Like it was just throwing stuff at the wall because it was. I was writing in this character's voice. For me, it wasn't even a real thing, and it's only about 4 or 5 months in where I'm like, where the cricketer get in touch and just like, you could do this for a living. Do you realize that? And it hadn't occurred to me. I thought I would blog. There was a couple of really good basketball blogs at the time who were also making money. And, I was kind of more based on that. I think the big one was called Free Darko. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just write blogs. So it doesn't matter if I offend everyone in cricket. And I didn't know I was offending everyone in cricket because I didn't know they were reading it, right? Like, I didn't know Giles Clarke was reading my blog. Like, why would I know that? Like, I've never met Giles Clarke. When I started the blog, I didn't know who Giles Clarke was, right? So none of that mattered. But that freedom with which I wrote the stuff, I think eventually alerted people to the analysis, right? So there were people that would come for the analysis. There were people that would come for the swearing. There were people that would come for the, memes. Because, I was creating memes before there was cricket Twitter. Like, I didn't know any of this. I was just throwing stuff at the wall. We made early YouTube videos. Like,
it's that creative freedom that it sounds like you were able to express.
Exactly. And it would just sort of come out and it from all that becomes the, I think it was the Wisden Cricketer at the time. And I don't know, those magazines. I've worked for both of them, and even I'm confused which one started as which one. But
between the Cricketer and the Wisden magazine, I think.
Yeah, which was
I'm not sure.
The Wisden Cricketer as well at one. Do you know what I mean? So it's very confusing, that whole thing and how things have moved around over there. But the Wisden Cricketer contacted me, a guy called Ed Craig, and he sort of said, "Look, I don't really understand what you're doing completely, but we think that you know a lot about cricket. We would like to give you some work, and if you come over to the UK, we think you'd have a career." And I was like, "What? Really?" Like it just none of that had occurred to me at all, and I wasn't getting anywhere. No one in Australia contacted me. It was only later I found out that there were some people. If I'd stuck around, I probably could have got some work eventually, but at that point, I didn't know. And then, you then get sort of dragged into a little bit of blogging, but a little bit of freelance, and things start to move. And
things start to kind of build up and you start to get known.
Yeah.
Moving into your analyst career,
Yep.
how did coming out in terms of, I did laugh at both the franchise teams that you work for, both have stars in their names.
Yes.
But
I never worked for Stars.
Yeah. I've never worked for Stars. I'm only the original and funder are so far
Are you really an analyst if you haven't worked for a team called the Stars? I don't know. Well, it's something to talk about on another day.
It's on the bucket list, maybe. That being said, the Southeast Stars, I respect the analyst down there quite a bit, so I wouldn't like to be taking his job anytime soon, and I can't see myself moving away from Manchester. But how did you get the role with the St. Lucia Stars?
So Sam Ball was one of those people that was reading Cricket with Balls that I didn't know. And Sam Ball's the head of Cricinfo. He sort of pulls me into Cricinfo, and I was the second video employee they ever hired. So I wasn't even hired to write, although clearly looking back on it, Sam knew he wanted me to write. He didn't know how to fit what I did into Cricinfo. Yeah. And the way that fit in was that they hired me for video, and I was at the grounds, and I'm a writer. So I'm just like, can I just write? Like, it's silly for me. Like, we were recording at the end of the day's play. So I'm there all day doing nothing, and I'm a worker. I need to be moving, right? And so I just started writing, and it must have been 2011. And by 2012, Sam was just like, okay, can we just call you the global writer and you just write about all the teams? I'm like, yeah, we can. That's awesome. I'll do that. I don't think I even got paid that much more. Like, it was literally just, you're already doing this. So they built that job around me, right? which meant that I wrote about all these different things. And we went to the 2016 World Cup. And I reckon Freddie Wild was the only T20 writer in the world at that point. And Freddie Wild, he was trying to be me. He was trying to be like a feature writer like I was. And then went, if I just write about T20, I can get paid, which is a very smart thing to do. And that's how he kind of got sucked into it. And 2016, it was by that point, it was really obvious that T20 cricket was smart and T20 cricket writing was dumb. And then no one knew anything about it. And like, you know, there was the older writers wouldn't touch it, right? And when they did, they wrote like really condescending pieces. There was still like, everyone was still going on about the cheerleaders in the IPL.
This was even happening in 2016?
Yeah.
Wow.
And there was, if you go back then, outside of Freddie, I don't think you'll find many people writing about it from an analytical point of view. I don't think, Cricinfo and Crickbuzz certainly didn't have T20 writers. They're the two, that's like 80% of your world cricket market. BBC didn't have anyone, right? Like The Guardian didn't have, like no one was writing about that format of the game. And even if they were generally test writers. They didn't want to be writing about it and they didn't know how to write about it because they didn't understand the sport, right? No. And yet at that stage, the Moneyball stuff was being talked about in cricket a lot. You had the Rajasthan Royals that had already won. Northamptonshire might have been.
Northants had done a really good run in the 2016 and I think it was 2015.
There you go.
And they were using, for example, Josh Cobb, who had an incredible boundary percentage, brought him in from Leicestershire.
They got all the big fat guys. Don't lead. They got all the big fat guys to hit boundaries. It was brilliant, right?
Richard Levy as well, a South African great.
Exactly. And I think that was around the period that there was a team in the Blast who didn't use a wicketkeeper in one game, but I don't think it was Northants. I think it was a team against Northants. I didn't know.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I've written about it before somewhere. It was one of the early things, but these things were happening and I was hearing about them. But my job was test writer, right? So I did World Cups and I did tests, and I basically did India, England, and Australia. And it was a great career. And I could have done it. I could still be doing it now if I wanted to, right? The Cricinfo weren't going to get rid of me. I was getting tons of reads and everything was fine. The problem was I got bored out of my mind because I need to keep trying different things. And I was a little bit stifled at ESPN. They gave me more creative freedom than anyone's ever had, but it was stifling. I was still so creative that there's no amount of creative freedom they could have given me, right? And so 2016, we go to the World Cup. My first column is basically everything that you see written about T20 cricket is stupid. No one knows anything about this sport. We shouldn't be writing about it. This is horrendous. And to be fair, a few T20 coaches reached out and said, finally, someone's saying this. And Sambit sort of said to me, well, okay, then why don't you teach us all how to write about T20 cricket? And I went, but I don't know what I'm doing either. I just, as a reader, I'm telling you guys this is crap. And he said, well, okay, well, instead of you covering, I think it was the Australian summer. I think Australia was playing Pakistan, if I remember correctly. He said, you could go and just do Australia-Pakistan, or you could go and cover the Big Bash. What do you want to do? I said, okay, I'll cover the Big Bash. And I still popped into a couple of the tests. But the whole idea, and I said, okay, but I need complete freedom because I don't know what this is. And so until it's finished, until the Big Bash is finished, I don't think I will understand how to write about this sport. And so I went there. First piece I wrote, he absolutely hated it, almost cancelled the whole thing. Because I wrote a whole piece about how I think Moses Enriquez was man of the match, but had been dropped 3 times. And I said, you have to factor in luck into a sport like this. And we, in Test cricket, don't even understand how to do this. And in T20 cricket, we don't know what we're doing. We're saying Moses Enriquez is the best player, but actually all these other things happen in this game that were... And that's not how old school journalism was. Old school journalism is voice of God. And I did the complete opposite. I went, I don't know what I'm doing, and we don't know what we're doing, and we need to work this out. And I didn't know that many people in T20 cricket, but Trent Woodhill is someone who'd followed me and contacted me before. Obviously, he was the Melbourne Stars assistant coach and general manager, I think, at that stage. So I called him up when I was in Melbourne. I said, mate, just explain to me what you know, because he's a big baseball fan. So he took me through all these different baseball people who he loved. I think Keith Law was one of them, but there was a bunch of them in this list. And he was taking me through baseball concepts and everything else. So I remember I think it was the first game I flew. So I went from Sydney to Melbourne. And on the way to the Melbourne game, I read Moneyball. I'd never even read it before. Right? And I read it. And I was like, okay, this is starting to make more sense to me now. And I see how this could work for cricket. Then I read another baseball book, which I've forgotten now. And I was like, okay, this is great. My peak problem here is I know.
Is it MVP machine?
No,
Or is
this
that
is well
later?
before
That's
MVP
way
machine.
before that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was one of the sort of spin-off Moneyball books that was a bit more techie because that's what I needed.
Oh,
Moneyball
okay.
was great, but after reading
But it's
Moneyball, I
a
was
story.
like,
It's a narrative.
yeah,
really,
like
isn't it,
this
reading
isn't
it?
really helping me at all. I was actually shocked so many people in cricket were like, I learned from Moneyball, and I was like, what did you learn? Because
Yeah. It's a great story, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not an informational guide.
And I did realize later that most people who said they learnt from Moneyball had only watched the movie and not even read the book. But that's a whole different story. So that I mean, they understood how handsome
It's a great
Brad
inspiration
Pitt was.
to then
Yeah.
go out and do your own learning.
So I read that book. And I think there might have been an early football one, Soccermetrics or Soccernomics.
Oh yeah,
one of those.
Soccernomics. I think
Something like that. So I might have read that. But again, I don't know that much about football. I don't know that much about baseball. I knew enough to follow the book, but I was like, I do know about basketball. Like, I was a basketball coach and I played basketball my whole life and, followed the NBA right up until moving to England. And it's a little bit less so just because of the time zones. But I was like, but anything that's explained in basketball, I reckon I'll be able to work out. Right. And I think there was a book by a guy called Stephen Shea. I've forgotten the name of that book. And then there was another book by a guy called Ben Taylor called Thinking Basketball. And I got those two and I was just like, and it was like instead of seeing it in code, I saw it in vision. Well,
Another kind of light
it's like the
bulb moment
Matrix
for
where
you.
I suddenly saw everything in code and I went, and I came up with true economy rate within a couple of days of learning all that, which is now used right across cricket. And I don't want to say it was like a moment
so no one
of genius.
else was using true economy or true strike rate?
No. Both of those came out of that first 3 days. It's that random, dude. And I'm not saying people weren't using it in the background, because I'm sure some teams had stuff, but no one had ever used that phrase. Certainly, like I invented the phrase, but I think I invented that. Nathan Lehman, I'm sure, had a version, and other people had versions that were out there. But I know that CricViz use it now, and I'm pretty sure they got it from me, unless there'll be some
one of your
random
articles
analyst.
on CricViz, not CricViz, on ESPN Crick Info is the language of T20, and you reference. I thought that was just you referencing it from. I didn't realize that you thought for it through, and were being one of the people to actually implement it.
I think most of the things in that piece were me inventing it, and that was only then about 2 weeks of learning all this stuff.
It's incredible.
It came to me very quickly. I was always good at maths, and obviously I understood cricket stats, and I understood the thing that stands me apart from most analysts is that I know how cricketers talk and think, and I know how maths works. The thing I can't do that some of them can do is the coding and all that sort of stuff. But I can tell you if an algorithm is wrong, because the way I have to work through it my own way, but I can work out if something's wrong. But I can't do, that's the one thing I can't do. But a lot of teams want to be involved, because a lot of analysts, when I first started, would sit in the corner and never say anything. Whereas I was
It's
like,
a hard thing, because a lot of are very, very knowledgeable about maths and data, but it's, I talk when I'm talking to people who ask me any advice. I mean, I've been in the game for 4 years, so I always say I can only answer a bit. But working out how you can communicate and break that division is so key.
No, exactly. And I think, that was part of it. And I had that relationship with Trent Woodhill, as I said. I might have even written about him in a Crick Info piece in that 10 article period that we're talking about of that first Big Bash. But I wrote a lot. This is really random. It just shows you how much luck plays a part in all this. But I looked at the schedules and I realized that if I followed the Scorchers or the Heat or the Hurricanes, I would be dead, right? So I didn't even go to Perth on that first trip at all. How come? Because of the 5-hour flights.
Oh, just your personal schedule would be absolutely ruined.
The only people who'd ever done the Big Bash schedule were the Cricket Australia people and the Channel 10 people who were recording. I mean, me and Mark Waugh must have been on the same flight like 10 days in a row, right? And Laurie Colliver and Damien Fleming and all those sorts of guys. And so I just went Melbourne, Sydney, because there's 2 teams in Melbourne and Sydney, and everyone had to come through. And I think I went to Hobart because they had 2 games in a row, and I went to Adelaide because they had 2 games in a row. But it meant that and I didn't look at who all the teams were, right? I just looked at the cities and went, okay, I can do this and not die. Turned out I almost died anyway.
Yeah.
It's too much fun. But when I did it, it turned out I had like 6 Stars games, Melbourne Stars games, right? So I'm writing really in-depth stuff about the Melbourne Stars. And Damien Fleming. Damien Fleming was reading as well. He was on the board, but Stephen Fleming and Trent Woodhill are reading all this stuff going, geez, this would be handy if we knew this. Like,
was Stephen Fleming in charge or connected with the Chennai Super Kings at this point?
Yeah.
Or was he was as well, and he was with
well entrenched with them. So this is 2016, 17, I think. And they basically said, in fact, I think it got even more dramatic. I think Trent had already said to me, we want to hire you for next year, but we don't know how it will work. And then they had a board meeting because they came last. Right. And so my pieces, they were analytical, but they were scathing as well, right? Going into detail why Melbourne Stars were losing. And it was a really fun franchise watching it just sort of go into the toilet, right? Like from my point of view, I was learning about analytics, but also being able to follow one team really helped. This is why, this isn't working. And they had a board meeting, mate, which is just hilarious, where Trent and Flem are sitting next to each other. And this old guy gets up and he's got all these printed papers and he's reading all this stuff to them. And Trent and Flem are looking at each other going, is he just reading Jarrod's article? And eventually, I think someone must have asked him. And he said, yes, this is some random guy. Why does he know more about our team than we do? And they said, well, we had asked for an analyst and you guys said we didn't need one. This is the guy we would like to hire. And I got greenlit then. I didn't even know I was going to get offered the job. So I actually got offered the Melbourne Stars job right after that season.
Before you got St. Lucia's. Okay.
But in the meantime, St. Lucia's, the CPL season was before that. So I already knew I had the Melbourne Stars job. And I was trying to work out as a journalist how it was going to work. That could I just take 3 months off, or how Cricket Info was going to accept it and all these sorts of things. And then while that was happening, a guy called Mohammed Khan, who had been the general manager of the Talawallas when they had won, got the job of St. Lucia. I think me and him had already been chatting and talking about stuff. And I went to the CPL draft. It was in London. I don't know why it was in London, but it was in London. And he understood that I could help him a lot. So he offered me the job of assistant general manager and analyst, I think. And then he quit midway through the CPL. So I went from analyst to general manager of a franchise within 3 or 4 weeks of starting my first ever job in professional cricket.
What was that like in terms of, what was your headspace in like then?
It was already pretty weird because I didn't really know what analyst was. And remember, my title was assistant general manager. That stuff I kind of knew a little bit more and was probably, I thought, more suited to it, certainly at that point. And I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I just thought occasionally the captain or the coach might come over and ask me my advice on some stuff. And then we got to St. Lucia, and the first day, Roddy Esquick came up and said, are you okay to run the bowling meeting tomorrow? I went, you what now?
Wow.
And it's Mitch McClenaghan, Darren Sammy, Karen Pollard, Mohammed Sammy.
You had a stacked team.
Yeah, I can't remember who. KS Ahmed. So it was a really good, it was a really good. But I had no idea what to do. I didn't know where to stand. I didn't know what to show them. I didn't have any video because they didn't have any video to give me.
You obviously had the access to Crick Info's database.
I had Crick Info. I had a little bit of ball by ball stuff, but nothing compared to what I have now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because all my stuff had been around really trying to come up with new metrics, which I couldn't code. So I would come up with a metric and not be able to use it, right? And then on top of that was a lot of my stuff was, value for drafts, right? I hadn't done anything about bowling plans because I wasn't an analyst.
Because you looked at pulling together a T20 team,
which is very
you hadn't
different.
looked at how you were gonna tell bowlers.
In your position, you do both, right? But that wasn't, as a journalist, it wouldn't make sense to be like, and in the next game, Mitchell McClenaghan should bowl this line to it's just not what you do. Even if you're an analyst, as a journalist, you're not that kind of analyst, right?
Because you never have to write from that point. You always have to be a neutral.
Certainly not back then. It's a bit different now that people like me have come through, and there's a few of us who might be like, oh, they should bowl like this to a certain player, or there might be a great player you might do it about occasionally. But on a general rule, like I don't know where where you bowled a Darren Bravo. Like, it's never occurred to me to worry about those sorts of things, let alone work out how to present it to this team. So, and then you got to remember, there's the baggage that I bring. So David Warner made it very clear that he knew who I was on day one, came and had breakfast with me, but also it was clear that he had read a lot of my stuff we've got friends in common. So, and I've interviewed him a couple of times. It wasn't the end of the world, but he made it clear. Kieran Pollard leaned in and said, "I've read everything you've ever written." And I said, "You haven't, because I've written so much, mate. But thank you."
Do you think that was a barrier to you?
Or
do you think it helped?
I didn't know what it was. I can tell you, without naming names, there were certain players, it was a complete barrier and ruined the relationship, and it was never going to get fixed.
Yeah.
There were other players who at least respected that I was going to say what I was going to say, right? There was going to be no sugarcoat. And when they came to me, I was like, I'm probably more brutal in person than I am even on the written word. So like, if, there was a big problem at one stage with something, and I was really clear. No, this is what I believe. And it went against the room, but it was like, well, that's fine.
But then at least as an analyst, you can say, I mean, I've just given you the data. This is what my interpretation of it, and I'm going to say it. I mean, you can sleep well at night because people might disagree with you, but you've said your piece. They have to go out and interpret it on the field.
Exactly. I mean, I didn't worry about it. You got to remember as well, I didn't really think this was going to be a career for me. Okay. So I thought, if anything, I was doing it to learn more about the game, because I really wanted to learn more about the game. I wanted to see how the other side worked. And on top of that, I thought, worst case scenario, I'll be able to write a pretty funny book. Right. And I could have. And you talk about the MVP machine. It wasn't the MVP machine at that stage. There was another book that Ben Miller, or is it Ben Lindbergh? That Ben Lindbergh had written. Called The Only Thing Is It Has to Work, which is about two baseball nerds taking over a minor league, a really minor league, basically a club baseball team, but professionals. And I read that on the way over, and I contacted them, and I've remained in touch with both of them ever since. But that really helped me to understand what could go wrong. And there's this, what it's like. These teams are weird, bully, clique, different things.
A dressing room is hard to you've got a dressing room in professional sport. There's a load of different pressures, load of different big personalities.
You're wearing the wrong part of the travel kit, and you don't know, because no one's ever told you that you need to wear that. You didn't even know that was the travel kit. You just got given a bunch of clothes, just little things like that. Like, I think the first day on the bus, I sat on Roddy Eswick's seat, and look, me and Roddy get along great, but Roddy's a big, massive dude. And he's like, "Get out of my chair." And I was like, "What have I done?" And I didn't know it didn't mean anything. Like, I didn't know that West Indians had seats on buses, and other teams don't care about that as much, right? Like, it's all that sort of stuff. So, and then I think I'm managing some of the relationships really well. Me and Kieran Pollard were getting on really well at this point, and some of the other players, and someone like Kavim Hodge, I'm still very close with to this day. Made some runs for the West Indies in the Test match today. But there are other relationships that are really tough. But then in the middle of all that, they at least think, well, he's only the analyst. And then suddenly I'm the general manager, right? And that just
suddenly a whole nother level of decision making.
And with some players, they went from not really respecting me to listening to everything. And then others who were like, what the hell? We're not, this guy can't be the general manager, which I don't know if I disagree with, because a week and a half earlier, I didn't know anything, right? But I get their belief as well. So so I got those two jobs. I did a lot of consulting for teams as well, and coaches and players, when they wanted stuff. And then the Scotland job came up. I was actually, that was through Edinburgh Rocks. I was supposed to be in the European League and ended up in Scotland. I still do stuff. The Australian team reached out to me during the World Cup. Things like that happen occasionally. A lot of my friends are major analysts, right? And so you know what it's like. Who do you contact when stuff's going wrong? You contact another analyst and go, "Are you following this? Can you just help me?" And I think the last couple of World Cups now, teams and coaches sometimes as well. Some of the coaches I work with are still coaching international teams or franchise teams, and they'll reach out.
So is it nice that you've experienced that, but now you're able to experience it in a less direct form?
It was funny when someone contacted me recently. They were like, "I'm really sorry, we can't pay you, obviously, because it's midway through the season and blah blah blah." And I was like, "No, it's fine." And I said, "It doesn't bother me. I like stretching these muscles, knowing that if you guys do all this and it doesn't work, no one's going to blame me, and I'll never mention that I told you any of this stuff." Right? It's not true, because I would make a running joke of how bad I screwed up a franchise, but
it would be next on a podcast.
It would be the next podcast. But you know, so I still enjoy that. I still want to do the job properly one day.
Mm.
I recently helped with the Major League Cricket as well, and I will be hoping to help them with their sort of implement their draft knowledge around their teams and things like that. And I might do stuff like that for other things. But I do want to run a team. I do want to be the general manager of.
Is that still an inspiration for you?
Yeah, I don't really. I'm not desperate to be an analyst again. I still get calls and offers and things like that. It just hasn't worked. It's not so much that I've said no. I mean, up until COVID, that was what I was doing. It was just that after COVID, those jobs were the first ones to go in the franchise leagues. And now that they've started coming back, I probably also cost too much and are too opinionated. So you need a coach.
And you have a lot of other responsibilities right around your podcast network, around your writing. So fitting in a whole, for example, going down and for example, like I do, I know a lot of these processes in the next couple of years will be automated, but live coding is not exactly how you want to be spending your time.
Exactly. And I'm still, my system's pretty much set up that I could probably do it tomorrow if I had to, right? But it's not, you know, I now have 5 or 6 people who work for me, right? And, you know, I'm taking up a new position with a new cricket website, you know, at the moment, and, you know, all these different things. All these people, you know, I would just get my other people to run my stuff while I'm away. It's possible, but it would need to be the right job. And to be honest, I don't want to go. A position like yours is different. And I was offered, I've been offered a couple of county jobs. I could have taken them. It didn't feel right at the time for various different reasons. But what I really wanted to do is to do it once properly. And county cricket also isn't properly. Like, I want to do it once where I'm involved with a proper budget, where I can sit down and you know, I had organized, and I've done this for St. Lucia, but I also did this for a BPL team and maybe even the Melbourne Stars as well. Proper scouting networks. When a scout goes to watch a cricketer, what we need to have to be marked down, right? Like all the way up from all the stuff I've learned from, you know, basketball and baseball and football and Aussie rules football, you know, of how to be more professional. And in fact, I was off one of the jobs I was offered with Bangalore. So I never was paid by Bangalore, but I did do some work with them. But I was with Cricket Info at the time, so I was like, I can't actually
accept
work for you guys at the moment.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conflict of interest.
But I did do stuff for them, partly because I wanted to know what they were thinking, so I could more understand how things went into a draft. But they were going to offer me the job as a forward scout, which again I would have really, really liked, where you go ahead of the team and you go and watch all of the opposition, and then you pass the knowledge on, which again, most professional sports have, and we don't have in cricket. So
we have a very different system, and it's developing though.
No, so, it's getting there. It's getting there. Yeah. So all that sort of stuff is the sort of stuff that I would want to do with a franchise. And it doesn't necessarily mean I have to be the general manager or anything, but a proper head of analytics with a team of 3 or 4 people and a scouting, department and budgets and things like that is how
not a Billy King, why have I just forget? Oh, the guy from Moneyball. Billy.
Well, no, he's a general manager, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I think that's the job. Yeah, Billy Bean. Yeah. I think that's the job I'm probably best suited to, because I have so many skills across so many things. And I actually really like the business side of running St. Lucia, of trying to work out how we turn the social media around and talking to sponsors. And, you know, I was meeting with the St. Lucia government about, you know, how we do stuff. I had a St. Lucia TV channel who was going to make a behind the scenes documentary to find our next. So the 15th person on our squad was going to be the winner of the competition.
That's class.
You know, all that sort of stuff. I had that all ready to go. But unfortunately, the ownership group was fraudulent and was about to get kicked out. So they kicked me out first, which is fine. I kind of knew that would happen. But that's the kind of stuff I want to do. The analyst stuff that you do is absolutely great. But I've done it. And
you want to see if you can do the next level.
Yeah, but also I think my skills are I'd rather hire people like you to do all that sort of stuff. I can come up with the bigger picture stuff of what we do. Go to take this full circle to back when I was a kid. That sort of stuff again. Of that ability to see things differently. And because I am a creative person, my main skills are creative rather than almost anything else. Any challenge I'm going to come at from a very different angle than everyone else and try and build things backwards and sideways. And then I can hire analysts like you and other people to come and do the analyst jobs while I can take it in a new direction. What's the next thing we should be having a look at? How can we do this better? How can we work better with coaches? And, you know, little things that
Having a 5-year plan rather than wanting to win our franchise tournament now.
Exactly. How do we do, and even saying to owners, your job is not to win. Your job is to make the finals, because if you make the finals, you probably ask a title anyway, right? Just little things like that, and to work through all those problems. That's kind of what I would like to do. And if you look at, since leaving Cricinfo, I have a podcast, I have a video, I have an emailer, I have a sports writing course, I do commentary, I do analysis, I do consultancy. I'm not a person that does one kind of job well. So being an analyst for St. Lucia and Melbourne and Scotland was great, but those were 2 or 3 month jobs, right? If I had to do your job for 12 months, my mind would just wander. It's not that, it's not even a case of anything else. It's just not how I'm built. Whereas if you're head of analytics or you're a general manager, your job is just so varied all the time, and you're putting out fires and you're trying to find things and everything else, that I just think that probably suits me better. That said, I've got so many friends now who are becoming coaches that I knew as players, and I probably will get a call again to do something else. And there was one county that were talking to me, and I said, and they were talking about being an analyst, and I said, look, it's a waste of time. You can find a good analyst, right? These are the things that I think I can do. I want to do a ground up system so that if there's a 12-year-old kid in your area who can play reverse sweeps. That's the information I want to know. Who's advanced, who's not advanced, who can hit sixes, who can't hit sixes, who are the kids we should be developing, who are the kids we shouldn't be developing. You've got a 16-year-old in one of your academies. What deliveries does he bowl? Does anyone have that sort of stuff is taking everything to the next level. And that actually really fascinates me. And to be, someone who could do that, that is more interesting. And you would know this. There are a lot of analysts who like doing it because they get to hang around with players, right? Which is fine. There's a lot of people in cricket media is exactly the same. I spent 15 years with players. I don't need to hang out with players anymore, right? I've just been sitting next to Darren Goff for friggin' 8 hours today, 9 hours today. My whole life is hanging around with players. I really want to be involved in something from the ground level up. I would love to, help someone like Scotland or Wales or Ireland or a county system of how do we turn this into a mini Iceland type situation, right?
How do we develop and actually beat the big guns in a certain way?
How does that happen? And happily work if Surrey came to me as well, like I'd have that conversation with them as well. But that is the thing that I am more interested in, of step by step of how we make sure that everyone is working in the same direction, so that talent isn't overlooked, and that weird cricketers fit in and everything else. Because at heart, I'm a giant weirdo, and I don't want there's no reason why Benny Howell hasn't played for England, right? Like, there are just certain situations that don't need to happen, right? But you need systems in place that actually
to recognize and create that.
And if you go back, England, and Nathan Lehman and all those guys, Mo Babat and now Freddie and all those guys, I respect a lot of them. But the fact is that at one stage, they didn't pick Benny Howell because they said that his top speed and his lower speed weren't that far apart, so he couldn't have been doing anything special, while he was averaging about 15 runs per wicket. Like, at a certain point, even the best talent development systems in the world are missing people. And I want to put in place so that as much as possible doesn't happen. And I think that's the thing that is really interesting to me, from the very top level all the way down. And how do you coach people how to be better in the nets? How do you coach people for a T20 game compared to a test match? All these things that haven't really been fully explored, and I think that is where I think that's a really important future. And to be honest, it goes back to the start, when I wanted to be an analyst and there was no such thing as an analyst. And now I want this position. There's no really such thing. Well, I don't even know what I'm talking about here, but these positions don't exist yet. But that is where our sport has to go. As you said before, it's getting better, but it needs to keep taking steps. Every under 19 player in the world, there should be an open database where anyone can go and have a look and go, okay, he bowls back of the hand slower ball, but he doesn't have a wobble ball. Can we teach him a wobble ball? Has he tried a wobble ball? Like, did he try it once and it didn't work? Like, have we got a wobble ball expert, right? Like, how do you upskill people? And so, and
how does it come more scientific in that way?
Yeah, repeatable that's always my big thing. When I help people with podcasting, or even in the old days when I used to help people with blogs, I would always say, how is this repeatable? Because you are going to have to go back to this blog 2 or 3 times a week for the next 2 years to be successful. So if you don't have an idea or a passion that is repeatable, you won't go back. Most podcasts fail because after a month, it's like, oh, this is just hard work. And I can't even think of the idea. And it's just like, no. Then come up with an idea that's not hard work, right? Make it repeatable, right? Then work out how to upskill your skills in other ways and everything else. Anyway, mate, I better go.
Yes.
You probably
Thank
asked
you
2 questions and I've given you
no
one answer.
worries. We'll have to catch up again at some point. But thank you very much, Jarrod, for coming on the Catch It podcast. I hope you best of luck best luck for your future, and hopefully one day we'll see you in a management position or a head of scouting at some major franchise.
Or moaning about it on a podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Jarrod. Cheers.